千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Last time, we talked about the chapter title, Holding to the Center. This particular iteration of the character center has a special meaning. The character zhong usually does mean center. Here, the extra meaning has to do with the quietness, the silence, the emptiness that is central to the Tao. It is the unlimited, infinite void that we studied in previous chapters. Holding on to this silent core means you understand the void of the Tao. And as we all keep this concept firmly in mind, it will guide us in our actions, in our words spoken in this material world. So holding to the center means keeping to the void, the silent void. And this meaning is what we will talk about today. Here is a quick look at the original text, the translation, and the sectional analysis that we did last time. So previously, we went through, identified 3 sections in this chapter. In the beginning section, it is talking about the concept of straw dogs. A very important, significant concept in the Tao. Back in those days, rituals were conducted with straw-made figurines representing animals, and they were set about the surface of the altar to represent living things, the myriad things. The table of the altar was meant to represent the world. Therefore, the ritual conducted over them was intended to be symbolic of the Tao operating on the entire world, that is, heaven and earth. So we'll talk about heaven and earth as well in a quick review. The ancients noted that there's emptiness between heaven and earth. They compared it to the bellows, which also seemed empty on the inside, and yet as you worked the handle of the bellows, more and more air keeps coming out. Just like the wind continues to blow across the landscape in ancient times. So the emptiness between heaven and earth seemed inexhaustible in its functionality of producing wind. This was symbolic of how the emptiness of the Tao continued to function in providing itself as the source of all things, including source of life for all living things. And therefore, last time, we went through some pictorial representations to talk about Tiandi, literally heaven and earth. There was a further distinction that was not touched upon in this particular chapter, but I felt that it was worthwhile to bring them up. 天上, that is, heaven added by the character signaling above. And that is literally the heavens above. By coincidence, we have that expression in English. In ancient times, east or west, people thought about heaven, the heavens above. So there's similar expressions, east and west. And the reverse of that, the complement of that, 天下, everything below heaven. So those two characters literally mean heaven and then below. It is the same as when we say everything below the sun. So everything below heaven, these are familiar expressions, so there is that distinction. Then we went a step further to talk about the other distinctions that the ancient Chinese had. When they considered everything below heaven, they talked about the myriad things, 万物, two characters, the first one literally meaning 10,000, but not literally, and the second character meaning things, as in living things. Sometimes 万物 is used to talk about all things, living or not. So the mountains, the rocks, inanimate objects could be included among the myriad things. So the myriad things had never been precisely defined. And this is also because sometimes people would think of all things as living in certain ways. Previously, we talked about how even rocks could be seen as living, that they might change over time, such as crystal formation and formations in caves that one could see. Another point to bring up again is that in this diagram, for clarity and pictorial purpose, I've got 万物, the myriad things, right in between heaven and earth. But in terms of mental paradigm, the ancients thought of 万物, the myriad things, as mostly associated with the earth. That is, the earth is mostly where all the living things reside, including human beings. Although there are birds that fly in the sky, there are insects that fly as well, like butterflies. They don't get too far away from the earth, and sooner or later, they have to land to rest. So 万物 will be associated mostly with the earth. Heaven will be the domain of stars, the moon, the sun, the clouds. So to continue on, previously, we also touched on the concept of straw dogs. So straw dogs has not been used in modern times as an important part of rituals, but in ancient times, their place was definitely important. They were referenced not just by Laozi, but also by other Tao masters of antiquity. And because of the symbolic nature, they were often used to make a number of different points. In this particular chapter, Laozi made references to the straw dogs and the components of a ritual. So he talked about, for instance, how straw dogs represented the myriad things, and that heaven and earth regarded the myriad things like straw dogs. This meant the priest who conducted the rituals would take the place in that metaphor of heaven and earth. The world itself, the second character, di, in 天地, will be represented by the surface of the altar. Then the straw dogs, as I mentioned, the myriad things. Then, most importantly, the ritual itself. It actually represents the progression of life. And if we think about it, the ritual, the different parts of a ritual can map easily to life itself. Every ritual has a beginning and has an end. Same with life. Every lifetime has a beginning and an end. And it goes even deeper than that, as we discussed last time. So one of the things that Lao Tzu wanted to mention was the purpose of the rituals, that the straw dogs had a purpose to take place in the ritual to be conducted. So what if we mirror that back to life? You, as one of the myriad things living on this earth, you were also created specifically for the purpose of taking part in the ritual called life. Now, looking at the rituals, different rituals have different purposes. We've got weddings, we've got funerals, we've got birthday celebrations, we've got all kinds of different rituals. Every ritual serves a different and particular purpose, and perhaps more than one. So the implication is that there must be some sort of purpose as well in your life. Then it's up to us to discover what that purpose is. Unlike a ritual where the purpose is clearly labeled even before you start, for us human beings, we oftentimes are not necessarily aware of what the purpose is or ought to be. Part of the ritual of life for us is the discovery of that purpose. And then lastly, we talked about the multiple levels of the metaphor. So we talked about how we can see ourselves as one of the myriad things, and therefore represented by the straw dogs on the altar. But that is only level 1. Then, in level 2, what if you shift your perspective and your paradigm so that instead of being on the table of the altar, you are the priest, you are the person conducting the ritual. You are the one regarding all other living things and treating them like straw dogs, which in the case of the Tao paradigm, it just means that when you interact with other human beings, that you treat them equally, regardless of their station in life, that you do not look down upon those who are below in terms of social class, and you don't bow down, degrading yourself, debasing yourself to the people that you perceive as being above you. So in Chinese, the expression 不卑不亢 talks about this composure, someone with an inherent dignity going about his or her business, neither possessing hubris nor self-humiliation, just very even-handed, composed way, self-possessed, self-assured way of dealing with the world. That is the ideal of the Tao. No excessive humility or excessive pride. A quiet confidence. That is what it means to be a Tao cultivator. Finally, we want to shift the paradigm yet again to take ourselves even another step beyond to look at this whole thing. Well, Before the priest conducts the ritual, there was someone who designed it, who shaped the ritual. So what if you are the architect of the ritual? What if this ritual you are now living was designed by none other than your highest self? What if in that state of being, you were aware of exactly the lessons that you need to learn in this lifetime, and therefore everything that you experience in the here and now was something that was put together, that was planned so that you can go through it. Much like when someone goes to the gym, already having in mind, today I'm going to do a number of sets of this particular exercise to work on this group of muscles, and then I'll do another exercise to work on something else. Suppose Earth is our gym of spirituality. We're here to exercise ourselves to become stronger spiritually. So that will be the third and final level embedded in the metaphor of straw dogs. Lastly, continuing on and wrapping up our recap, back to the world. So we got to the point where we talked about, we returned our discussion to the space between heaven and earth being like a bellows. So if you put yourself in the shoes of the ancients, you imagine what they perceived: the skies above, the earth below, a lot of emptiness in between, and that emptiness seems to give rise to so much. There's the weather, there's the rain, there's the snow, there's the warmth of the sunlight, the change of day into night, night back to day again. So much that is dynamic, that is ever changing. So that emptiness is actually very active. That emptiness produces a lot. And that is the point that we left off last time, ready to pick it up again. Let's return to line 7. Line 7 says, empty and yet never exhausted. Now you see exactly what the ancients were getting at. Just looking at the world, just observing, just stepping outside, looking around and seeing all the activities happening from the seemingly empty sky. That could be pretty inspirational by itself. So let's take a look at the characters. We got 4 characters in this line, and they can be broken down. First character just means empty. That's a common character for that meaning, empty or emptiness. And then the second character is a connective character, but. The third character is 不, and that just means not. This is used all the time for negation. And then the last character there, ancient context, ancient meaning, exhausted. Empty but not exhausted. Translated, as you can see, as empty and yet never exhausted. Just to make it more readable in English. So this is a description of the Tao, but the Tao is mirrored in every aspect of existence. So the ancient sages reflected that upon Tao cultivation. The appearance of emptiness is definitely true in Tao cultivation. People that don't know about the Tao may assume that there's nothing to it, that it appears to be empty. But those that cultivate, which hopefully includes you and me, Tao cultivators can feel the infinite, inexhaustible depth of the Tao. There's so much to it. You gain insights, ideas, different ways, perspectives to look at life. It can be used in every aspect of your existence and mine. It can be applied to work, to social life, to family. It can be applied everywhere. The more they use it, the more there is to use. So that is the reason for us to explore the Tao together, to find more lessons that we can apply to life. So let's continue on. Line 8. Line 8 says, it moves and produces more. So this is a reference to nature itself. As I said, the emptiness between heaven and earth. It is also a reference to the Tao, which is synonymous with nature. The Tao moves. We can't see the Tao. We can perceive the effect of the Tao upon the world. It moves and produces more. Seemingly out of nowhere, more and more life is emerging in the world. So one thing to note is that this line and the line above it form a yin and yang pair. Let's talk about the yin side first. Use the Tao. This is in reference to Tao cultivation. You can use the Tao mentally and spiritually. This has a lot to do with reflection, contemplation, study, utilizing your mind. That is, the more you apply the Tao in your mind, the clearer everything becomes. The more you contemplate it, the more powerful it is for you. The mind itself seems empty, like the void of the Tao, and yet new ideas keep coming up. The more you cultivate, the more creative you become as a person, the more intuitive you become. You can develop that intuition in the mind so that when you come upon choices in life, your intuition will inform you about the right approach in that situation. So that is the yin side. The yin side is the side that appears to be passive and it represents the mind. Let's talk about the other side, the yang side. Yang side is about the overt, about the visible, about the obvious side of life, the action-oriented side of life. So the yang side is not about the mental aspects anymore. It's about taking actions in the world in accordance with the Tao. This covers what you do and what you say. And the more you utilize the Tao, use it to guide you in your actions as well as your words, the more easily you can navigate through life. And this comes into a complementary, synergistic duality with the yin side. So as you carry out your actions in the world, you're guided by your observations, your perceptions about what is happening, your awareness, all of that takes place in the mind. And that, in effect, will shift your actions accordingly so that you can always keep yourself on the right path. And are particularly important because there are so many obstacles and minefields in life. So I want to bring us back to the pictorial representation of heaven and earth. And specifically, I want to showcase the two lines that we have gone through. To summarize, we have this empty space. The empty space is above ground level, the earth, the hills, the mountains, and the empty space is below the sun, the moon, and the stars. So there seems to be nothing in it, just like the bellows of the smith. Living in this world, we can definitely, as we walk around outside, we can feel the movement. of air currents. We can feel the wind. We can feel the breeze. And we know from experience that the air currents will always be around. There's always going to be wind, sometimes strong, sometimes light, sometimes a gale, sometimes a breeze. Whatever that is, there is a source of energy to propel that air, and there seems to be no end to that source. Therefore, the air is moving and produces more. So the world itself, and when I say the world, I'd like you to look at this graphic and consider both the heaven and earth, 10D, as the world. Everything that you see in this slide is enclosed in the definition of the world. The world itself, enclosed by heaven on top, earth below, is the largest bellows of all. And that gives rise to the question, what are the hands that work this largest bellows of all? Continue on. Let's go to line 9. Line 9 says, too many words hasten failure. This is perhaps the most significant part of Tao Te Ching chapter 5. These are the last two lines. So I want to draw attention to these two characters at the beginning of line 9. 多言. Here's the pinyin for that. So the meaning is simple. 多 means many, excess or excessive, or too much. And then the exact meaning of 多 depends on the context. Mandarin is contextual. The second character, 言, words, specifically spoken words. So together, this is talking about too many spoken words or talking too much, talking inappropriately, talking in a way that is contrary to the Tao. So let's talk about the two layers of meaning in 多言. First, as I mentioned, being a chatterbox, overly verbose, gossipy, rumor mongering, talking too much. Now, at the level of society, there is another meaning, and that is bureaucracy, in the sense of too many rules, too many laws and regulations that become burdensome. So that is at that level, it is the equivalent to people talking too much. And you can, as you live through life, you've also encountered people who try to lay down rules on other people. They set up a lot of what you should do, what you should not do, etc. Eventually, they themselves become confused as well. So 多言 has multiple layers of meaning, and we're focusing on two in this particular case. Then let's talk about the next two characters, also important. And they are especially important because the meaning has changed from ancient times to modern times in terms of the character. So in modern Mandarin, this particular character means to count, the verbal form, to count something, to count how many things you possess. And then in ancient times, it's something different. In the ancient usage, no longer used in modern Mandarin, it means to accelerate, to speed up, to be faster. So here, it is using that ancient meaning. It does not mean count. It means to speed up. Now, let's go to the next character, the last character here. In modern Mandarin, this means pour. or poverty, being poor. In ancient times, it means failure or downfall. This one is easier to see in terms of the connection between the ancient meaning and the modern meaning. Because when you think about poverty, being poor, that is a financial failure or a financial downfall. So the meaning are definitely connected. But in this ancient context, I want everyone to focus on the meaning of failure in general. So when you bring the two together, this is basically saying that when you talk too much, when you express yourself with too many inappropriate words, contrary to the Tao, you speed up, you accelerate failure. So it's a very negative thing to engage in from the perspective of the ancient masters. It's like when they say, well, you talk too much. That's what they mean. If you talk that much, you hasten your own failure in life. So now when we put it together, we find that this expression also has multiple levels of meaning at the personal level and at the larger level. So in ancient times, for the kingdom or the empire, I talked about how too many words reflected in society will be too many laws, regulations that impose a burden on the people. So at that level, it just means complex laws create loopholes in bureaucracy, and that will hasten the failure of the empire or the kingdom. Historically, we have seen example after example how the disintegration of empires throughout history have always begun that way, with corruption, with bureaucratic problems within the empire that cause the disintegration to begin. Now we map that to the level of personal interactions, thinking about yourself, the life that you lead as your own private kingdom. It means those talk too much will cause their own demise. This is the one that we're familiar with. Now Lao Tzu, with one line, is talking about both. So in general, this is basically saying that anything that is too complex goes against the simplicity of the Tao. Anything that is too verbose, too many words, especially inappropriate expressions, all of those become contrary to the Tao. And this is the reason why the more you cultivate, the more you become watchful of what you speak. To illustrate that, I've put together a graph that I want to share with everyone. This graph has a couple of scales, like a X and Y axes, starting with the horizontal scale. The horizontal scale is easy to understand. On the left, you see non-stop noise, noisy. And then on the very right, you see no words, silence, quietude. In between, you've got the various grades, the steps. So next to non-stop noise, you've got many words, not quite non-stop, but many. And then next to no words, you've got few words. Those are the people who are terse, who pick and choose what they say carefully, so they don't talk too much. And then in the middle, some words, and perhaps most of us will fit into that category, that sometimes we're quiet, sometimes we're talkative. So most of us may cluster around the middle. Now, let me also show the vertical scale, the y-axis. So as you can see, this is the axis that has to do with meaning. At the top, meaningful, full of meaning. At the bottom, meaningless, devoid of meaning. Then, just as it is with the x-axis, in the y-axis, we have 5 steps. Next to meaningful, much meaning. And then one step above meaningless is little meaning. In between, some meaning. So meaning rather than words. Now we know the two are independent of one another because they form this space, but we have experienced times when very little is being said, but much meaning is expressed. So the space that they form between them can be expressed like this. So when you think about something that is in the upper right-hand quadrant, in personal interactions, sometimes even just a look, a glance, a touch, no words at all, and yet much meaning is being conveyed. That's on the upper right-hand side. And we have also experienced the opposite. Perhaps a slick politician who talks a lot, uses many words, but then ends up expressing little and promising nothing. So what would that be? Well, that would be more toward the lower left-hand quadrant. Many words, but little or no meaning. And we can also think about the other quadrants and find examples. For instance, when we take a look at the upper left-hand quadrants, many words, a lot of meaning, we see examples of that in situations like school, where a teacher has to utilize many words to convey knowledge to the students. So the knowledge is the meaning being conveyed, but there has to be quite a few words being utilized for that purpose. Or if you think in terms of objects, if you think about like an encyclopedia, no question about it, it's a collection of many words, but it is also the distillation of human knowledge, and therefore it would also belong in the upper left-hand quadrant. So what about the opposite? What about things that have no words but convey not a whole lot of meaning? Well, typically inanimate objects, maybe just a rock, a pebble, well, it's completely silent. It doesn't express a whole lot of meaning. It's just that. It's just the object itself. So we know the two axes are independent of one another. Then we want to talk about where the Tao fits into all of this. Multiple times in the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu talks about how the Tao is silent. It cannot be heard. Nature itself, it does its work, it does everything, but it says nothing. The changing of seasons occur without fanfare, without the Tao or nature announcing the change. It just happens. Flowers bloom when the time is right. It doesn't need to make an announcement. It doesn't need to advertise. So at the very upper right-hand side, we've got the Tao that expresses all possible meanings using no words. And then I want to also talk about the Tao sages. The wise sages who wish to learn from the Tao or learn from nature, to them it's the same thing. These wise sages get to a point where they don't talk that much. But what they do say tend to be very important. That is, they express a lot of meaning using fewer words. And when that is the case, people really tune in, people listen to them, people pay attention. Now, what about us? We're not at the level of the Tao masters, we're not at the level of the sages. We aspire to be that, but in our everyday lives, we sometimes speak quite a bit, and we may even be expressing things of meaning. We may even convey meaning to one another, but we know that there are also times when we find ourselves talking a lot, but not saying much. That is when we become more like the annoying people. For us, the best we can do oftentimes is to not fall into this category. And I think you know the kind of people I'm talking about. People who talk a lot, but they don't really have a whole lot to say. They don't have that much that is meaningful or worthwhile or valuable. So when they're done talking, you don't really need to retain what they have expressed because you know it isn't useful at all. Then I also have one last category here, unwise doom scrolling. Doom scrolling is a relatively new expression. It's a word describing how people now are sometimes in a state that is, I would say, completely contrary to the Tao. Doom scrolling means you're spending a lot of time, wasting a lot of time scrolling through your phone, perhaps social media, perhaps the news. Doom scrolling because you're just endlessly looking at depressing news about one disaster after another in the world, about problems, about issues. It's endless noise. It's making you depressed. It's all doom and gloom, but it's nothing useful or meaningful, nothing that you can act on. So this is actually the most contrary to the Tao. Then the question that I have for everyone is, where would you place yourself in this graph? Are you clustering around the middle? Are you taking steps to go a little bit further to the upper right-hand quadrant? Do you find yourself falling back to the lower left-hand side? The direction of spiritual cultivation is definitely to the upper right-hand side in this graph. So this is when we have to sort of examine ourselves. We have to review our daily actions, our interactions with other people, and ask questions like, have I talked too much but said too little that is meaningful? Too little that really matters to myself and other people? And do I know that? Do I know the meaning that I convey for a fact? What I mean is, sometimes we may think of what we say as being very meaningful, but perhaps that is because we don't know how other people are reacting to it. They may actually think the opposite. While we think what we say is meaningful, other people may actually react by thinking that the words that we have uttered don't mean a whole lot. So how certain are we that we are closer to the wise sages than the people who annoy others? Regardless of where you happen to be, I think we can agree that the direction we want to go is spiritual cultivation. where we can be much more careful in what we say, using fewer words, but conveying more that is meaningful or useful for other people. Line 10 says, cannot compare to keeping to the void. So we start this line with 不如. There is the pinyin for 不如. The first character is the same negation as before. 不 means not. And then 如, the second character there, means compare. Cannot compare, not as good as. So the previous line, line 9, points to the negativity of too many words. Therefore, this line, line 10, we can assume this line is about fewer words, being quiet, being silent. But then the last character of this line, 中, means the center or middle. If we didn't know the ancient context, we would assume that the meaning is about the middle path or the moderation. This will be at odds with our assumption that the last line should be about the opposite of line 9, fewer words instead of many words. So let me explain. First of all, the last two characters, 手中. 手 means to hold on to hang on to stay with, to stay in, to keep. And then 中 in modern Mandarin means center or middle. Now, it is the same character as 中国, which means China. And some misunderstand 中国 as Middle Kingdom. Sometimes you will hear people say China, the Middle Kingdom. Now, in this ancient usage, 中 actually has a different meaning. Similar to what we talked about for line 9, where the character for count in ancient times actually meant to accelerate, and then the character for poverty actually meant failure in ancient times. So for this line, it's similar that people who do not know classical Chinese or ancient Chinese may translate it as holding to the center or keeping to the middle, keeping to the path of moderation. Now let me talk about what it actually meant to Laozi. 中 in this context is synonymous with 冲, which means emptiness as well. And this requires additional linguistic knowledge to fully understand. And before we go there, I just want to say that when you say to hold on to the emptiness, it's talking about holding on to the empty void of the Tao. The character 冲 that is synonymous with, it's in modern Mandarin, it means to rinse or flush with water. The related meaning in ancient times, emptiness, referencing the Tao, it was related to rinsing and flushing because when you rinse something, you are cleansing the dirt away from something. You are emptying an object of dirt. And therefore, the related meaning is emptiness. So now, back to the empty void of the Tao. It is reiterated multiple times in the Tao Te Ching that the Tao cannot be heard for it is absolutely silent. It doesn't talk. It doesn't speak. What you hear from the Tao are the whispers that only you can feel, that you can sense deep within. They are definitely not sound waves manifesting in physical reality. So the opposite of talking too much is not keeping to the middle. The actual advice from Lao Tzu is to keep quiet, to be more like the Tao. In the practice of the Tao, particularly as we apply Tao cultivation to life, Tao masters through the ages are emphatic that there are so many things we say that we need to be careful of, that we need to watch out for. There are so many things that can be better reduced or unsaid. So I want to bring out some of those categories, and I have to say there are so many categories of things that we should not say, or should say less, that it is very easy to fill out a list of a couple dozen categories, each one distinct from the other. To illustrate that, I will just take a partial view. I will just take some of them, and I want to illustrate that it's not difficult at all to fill out the initial letters of the alphabet. The slide is not big enough for us to accommodate all the alphabets, but we can do the first dozen or so. So what are some of these words that we should reduce, that we should decrease? A would be arrogant words. So this would be bragging. This would be drawing attention to yourself, hogging the spotlight. This is referenced in a future chapter, Tao Te Ching chapter 30, as well as other chapters that talk about bragging being contrary to the Tao. In real life applications, this is something that we see quite a bit because we do encounter people who are egotistical from time to time, arrogant people who talk about themselves all the time. In the workplace setting, we also see people trying to claim credit for something good that was done. For the Tao cultivator, the appropriate thing to do, if someone was in a leadership position and something good has been accomplished, the person aware of the Tao will give credit to the team. That it's not the manager or the supervisor who was the one that did it, but it was the team that all pulled together, everybody pulled together, and everybody produced the great results. And here's the interesting thing that I have observed in life. The arrogant people who claim credit, they end up being seen as the one who should not take any credit. Whereas the wise manager or supervisor who gives credit to the team, invariably that person is seen as an excellent manager or supervisor who was responsible for keeping the team together to produce that great result. And therefore, credit goes to him or her. So uttering arrogant words has the opposite effect in real life as the intention. The intention is to hog the spotlight, but it ends up being the very opposite. Then, category B, beautiful words. This is referenced in the last chapter of the Tao Te Ching that says beautiful words are not true. Specifically, this is talking about lies. When we say beautiful lies, lies that sound really good, but just aren't true. And it can also be like a half-truth, something that is technically truth, but uttered to be misleading, to let people draw the wrong conclusion. Or flattery. Flattery sounds really good, sounds pleasant, sounds great to the ears, but if it's a flattering remark, it may be based on a falsehood. So beautiful words. Category B. What about C? Well, C is easy. C, critical words, criticism, condemnation that lead to contention. All C words. And this is referenced in the Tao Te Ching as well. For instance, in chapter 4 of the Tao Te Ching, it talks about blunting the sharpness. The sharpness is what is used as a metaphor. The sharp edge of a blade is metaphoric of the sharp criticism that we use on one another. So that is also something to be avoided, something to decrease. Even when there is a necessity to be critical, the Tao cultivator understands the importance of using diplomacy to convey the criticism, to make it constructive. Category D, dogma, dogmatic words. These are absolute, inflexible statements contrary to the Tao. The Tao is about life. Life is about being flexible. Therefore, being inflexible is more associated with death. So this is definitely something that is addressed multiple times whenever the Tao Te Ching talks about the power of the soft. It is referring to this. To be dogmatic is to have that inflexibility, permitting no other interpretation. And these are universal statements like always, never, all, etc. One of the noted figures in American history, Benjamin Franklin, was lauded as a skillful diplomat. And when he talked about what he did, he would always emphasize that there are few certainties in life, except death and taxes. So when he expressed himself, he would always be careful to say things like, it seems to me that, I imagine it to be so and so, rather than to make a dogmatic, inflexible, absolute statement that leaves no room for someone to contradict you or for you to have made a mistake unwittingly. So being dogmatic is opposed to the Tao. Being flexible, being diplomatic will be aligned with the Tao. So what about category E? Here we have empty words. Empty words are referenced in Tao Te Ching chapter 22. These are the words that carry no meaning because they are redundant, they are unnecessary. And when we speak with too many words, a certainty is that many of the words we use are going to be fillers. That is, words that can be taken out without affecting the meaning. Think about the following phrase. This is just something that I made up. A phrase that goes like this. First of all, I am thinking to myself that it's a difficult situation, but nevertheless, you should choose among 3 options. Now, there are actually quite a few fillers in that phrase. When you say, first of all, you could simply say first, and that conveys it. When you say, I am thinking to myself, we hear that a lot from people, but you can't really think to anyone else except yourself. Rather than to say, I am thinking to myself, it is better to simply say, I think. That's it. That conveys your meaning. It is similar when you say things like, I nodded my head. Well, you can't really nod anything else. You can say, I nodded, and that's it. And you can say things like, hey, listen, there's a possibility that you may potentially regret your decision. We hear that quite a bit. Well, that can be simplified greatly. You may regret your decision. Potentially becomes a filler word, extraneous, unnecessary. And you don't even have to say there is a possibility. Simply by saying you may, that covers it. So we human beings use a lot of these unnecessary empty words. It is something to watch out for. Typically, people don't pay attention to that, but a Tao cultivator would start paying attention to saying things that are redundant or unnecessary or empty. Now, the F category, frivolous words. This is referenced as being light, lightness. Tao Te Ching, chapter 26, chapter 63, all point to it. To be frivolous, to treat things too lightly, just means that you're saying things that are inconsiderate, that you haven't thought about, that you've made a promise too quickly, too lightly, without serious intent. The problem with frivolous words is that you haven't really thought about it. You haven't really made that promise with sincerity, and therefore the guarantees or promises will be quickly broken. And when you break those promises, those guarantees, your credibility becomes eroded. So that is only to the negative for yourself. And what about category G? Well, that's easy. Gossip, unverified words, rumors, hearsay that can spread like wildfire. There's particular emphasis on this in Tao cultivation. Tao masters since ancient times have recognized the tremendous power of falsehoods spread as rumors. So we'll talk about that. Let me cover category H, hurtful words. Words that are said with specific intent to exploit a vulnerability. What do I mean by that? What I mean is people are very good at finding other people's buttons to push. You know, once you get to know someone, you know what to say to really hurt that person. That is a dark truth about humanity, but we see it all the time. We especially know what to say to hurt someone we know well, like a loved one. So the hurtful words are oftentimes uttered in a family setting, to your loved ones, to the people you know best of all. But if we practice compassion, should we really be uttering the hurtful words? We know what they are. And lastly, the I category, interrupting words, cutting people off mid-sentence, speaking out of turn to cut people short. Now, I find many examples of this from daily life, people cutting other people short all the time. And I specifically found instances in my life where we had at the workplace setting, I saw and witnessed people who cut other people short. In one case, it was someone cutting off a manager, a supervisor short in mid-sentence. And this person was doing it all the time. Initially, I was puzzled, but later on, I could see that it was because this person wanted to impress his manager. He wanted to show how quick he was, that he grasped the problem immediately. But then, because of the interruption, it actually produced the very opposite effect because it made him seem desperate. I have also seen it in the opposite scenario where a manager is cutting off someone below his level, and it became clear after a while that it was because the manager was insecure and wanted to avoid having the person below that level showcase talents that were above him. And this had the opposite effect as well, because people quickly saw through that and realized how insecure he was. Now, that's just the workplace scenario. The same thing applies to a social situation as well as family. When you cut people off, you may be intending to do something. You had a particular purpose for cutting that person off, but I think chances are excellent that you will achieve the very opposite effect. And therefore, that makes this contrary to the Tao as well. Now, I mentioned that gossip has a particular power to mislead, to cause problems, and this is something that the ancient sages were very mindful of. To illustrate that, there is a story from ancient times that I would like to share with you. It is called The Power of Rumors. And this is a story from the spring and autumn period of ancient China. Back in those days, there was a scholar that was one of the top students under Confucius. This scholar was well known for being morally upright. He was a virtuous person as well as a good son to his elderly mother. One day, while his mother was home weaving her cloth, a neighbor came running into the house. He seemed so frantic. He said to her, "Horrible, horrible news. Your son has killed someone." She thought this was ridiculous because she knew her own son very well. So she replied, "My son would never kill anyone." After a while, another person came running in and told her the same thing. "Your son has killed someone." She still refused to believe. Surely someone made a mistake. She decided she should ignore the warning, remain calm, and go back to her weaving. After a while, a third person came running in and repeated the same thing to her. Your son has killed someone." She still felt it could not possibly be true. But why would these people all say the same thing? What if it was true? In ancient times, an entire family could be in trouble if one family member committed a crime. If her son did kill someone, then the authority would be coming for her soon. Fear crept into her thoughts. She dropped the cloth she was weaving, went out the back door, jumped over the back wall, and ran away. Much later, the truth came out. The crime was not committed by her son after all. It was done by another man with the same name. The same name is what caused the confusion. The end. This story is a historical story. That is, it's based on actual events, historical figures. The story became well known in Chinese culture as the way to illustrate the terrifying power of false rumors. You see, it didn't matter that the scholar was highly virtuous, even the most virtuous person that anyone knew, nor did it matter that his mother had the highest confidence in him. All it takes to compel belief is multiple people repeating the same falsehood. And when several people did that, others begin to believe. Now, this is part of human nature. This is something that is true regardless of East or West, ancient times or modern times. We have the exact same problem in the modern world. At the level of our society, we have all seen outright lies and fabrications being repeated frequently and then accepted as true by millions of people. At the level of our personal lives, we have always heard rumors and gossip floating around. Sometimes it can be difficult to know what to believe. So in a world like this, what should we do as cultivators of the Tao? Can we not hold ourselves to a higher standard? Tao teachers, Tao masters will say, absolutely. We should be different from the people who pass on rumors and gossip without any thought being applied to them. Before repeating something that we hear, we should consider the following. So this thing that we have heard, is it true? Can it be independently verified? Verified by someone who is not the source of that information, but another source. And before we repeat something that is true, we should consider, is it necessary to convey this information, to pass on this information? Does it serve a constructive purpose? Is it useful? Is it something that is positive? And lastly, is it kind? We talked about hurtful words. If we were to practice compassion, why should we be the agent of causing hurt or harm? If the words are hurtful, should we be the ones to spread them? So with these considerations, sometimes known as the three gates of communication, we go back to the very end of this chapter where Lao Tzu says, too many words hasten failure, cannot compare to keeping to the void. Now you know the void is the silent, quiet void of the Tao. Rather than to speak too many words, passing on rumors, harmful gossip, all of those things are bad for us, bad for other people, bad for humanity, cannot compare to keeping quiet. So let me summarize what we have talked about in keeping to the void. Here is the thought process of the Tao. First, as a reminder for everyone, The Tao is the emptiness that contains unlimited power. And the Tao is also the ultimate wordless silence. It does not speak. In every level of existence, the Tao says nothing but does everything. You and I, all of us, we emerge from the Tao and we reflect the Tao. Therefore, it is natural for us to seek alignment with the Tao. Specifically, the empty silence of the Tao manifests in us as a genuine practice in the Tao of humility. Therefore, the silence of the Tao is reflected in us as having no excessive need to speak too many words. That is the thought process of the Tao. It is what Lao Tzu is attempting to convey in this chapter of the Tao Te Ching. Now, I think we are ready to do a paraphrase of what we have studied. Our purpose, as ever, is to demonstrate understanding by expressing the original using modern language. So now we're looking at the 3 sections of chapter 5 once again, and we'll start with the first section, which, as I think everyone recalls, is about the straw dogs. Here's the paraphrase I would like to offer for the first section. Nature functions without human emotions. When life is created, it is not due to love. When life ends, it is not due to hate. It is as if all living things are straw dogs used in a ritual. Observing this, the sages also do their work in the same impartial way. They help the people around them, but it's not because they like some better than others. They do so only because helping others is what they do naturally. Now, the next section. Continuing from the first section, consider the space between heaven and earth, like the emptiness inside a bellows. There seems to be nothing in it. The more you work the bellows, the more air comes out. Similarly, the never-ending movement of heaven and earth creates the wind, the clouds, rain, snow, and all other weather manifestations. The more time passes, the more we see. This is the Tao. It functions without fuss, without noise, and the wonders never cease. And now, let's go to the final section. People, on the other hand, tend to waste words and achieve little. It would be better to emulate the Tao. If we can hold on to its principles, we too can accomplish everything without fuss, without noise. So that is the paraphrase for Tao Te Ching chapter 5. I hope it is helpful. Finally, we should do the full circle discussion about this chapter. In the last lines of chapter 5, Lao Tzu says it would be better to hold to the void, to use less words and be more silent, like the Tao. We can link this back to the beginning. In the beginning, Lao Tzu talks about the impartiality of the Tao. The Tao does not play favorites. When we connect these two concepts together, it is clear. Tao cultivators regard everyone as equal, and they show this through actions, not words. The bottom parts of the circle is to not waste words. The top half of the circle is about being the same, treating everyone the same. This applies well to our world, where many people cannot practice what they preach. Many people are not able to treat others fairly, equally, without prejudice or discrimination. In the cultivation of the Tao, we aspire to differentiate ourselves by remembering the words of Lao Tzu. And rather than to talk about it, rather than to talk about equality, we demonstrate through actions instead. We keep quiet, remembering that too many words hasten failure, cannot compare to keeping to the void. We let our actions speak louder than words. This brings us to the end of our discussion on chapter 6, and we are now also nearing the end of our time together in this meeting today. So now will be a good time for us to go to the summary for today. Last time, the summary was all about the straw dogs. We talked about the following 4 points. The sages are the people that we aspire to emulate, and the sages emulate the Tao. And that is, the Tao is impartial, treats all things like straw dogs. The sages treat everyone with the same respect and courtesy. That is also what we should do. Number 2 is about purpose, is about what we are here to do. Just as the straw dogs play a role in the ritual by being set atop the altar, we all have a role to play in this ritual called life. What is that role? The role can change. Number 3, cultivate the appropriate perspective on the physical self. The straw dogs are constructed literally out of straws and then discarded after use. When the ritual is done, they are thrown away or they are burned. Mapping that to our physical reality, it basically says the physical bodies we inhabit, this is not the important thing. The spirit that inhabits the body, like the meaning inherent in a straw dog, that is the important thing. So there's no need to be fixated excessively on the physical body. It is something that is temporary at best. And number 4, elevate our thinking to the next level. We're more than just straw dogs. We want to transcend the metaphor. We can be the ones conducting the ritual. We are the ones who architected the rituals themselves. We don't need to be the straw dogs. We can be the ones to look at the straw dogs. We're the ones that planned, designed the ritual in the first place. It's all part of the growth for the soul. So that is the summary for the top half of the chapter. The summary for today is to be aligned with the Tao. Starting with the realization that the Tao is inexhaustible. It is infinite. The more you use it, the more there is to use. Therefore, the more we cultivate, the more skillfully we can use more of it. Number 2, cultivate humility. We can be more capable and humble at the same time, much like the Tao is able to do everything and says nothing. Number 3, we can observe those who speak too much, and we see the truth in the words of Lao Tzu, that too many words hasten failure. We can observe the negative consequences that people who speak too much bring upon themselves, and we can learn from that. Speak less and do more. By watching what we say, we can find peace and contentment in the silence of the Tao. Oftentimes, we don't need to talk really all that much. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.